Hey everyone, welcome back. We're diving back into some entitled people stories. Today we've got 3 fantastic tales of people who tried to take advantage, play the system, or just be plain petty, and how they got shut down. One involves a backstabbing coworker, another a store stealing overtime, and the last a neighbor claiming a public parking spot. I stopped absorbing my coworker's errors after he tried to escalate my lateness. A few weeks ago, I learned a very valuable lesson about workplace loyalty, misplaced kindness, and exactly how fast someone will throw you under a bus if it benefits them even a little. Up until then, I genuinely thought I was doing the right thing by quietly covering for a coworker and keeping things off management's radar. Turns out, I was just making myself look foolish. I work on a small team where we handle equipment that runs around the clock. There are protocols for a reason, nothing complicated, just basic steps to make sure equipment doesn't sit offline overnight and that remote teams are notified if something goes down. Missing those steps doesn't cause an immediate disaster, but it absolutely creates headaches for the next shift. Everyone knows this. A few weeks back, my coworker, let's call him CW, skipped some of those minor protocols. A piece of equipment stayed down overnight and a couple of remote teams weren't notified. Nothing catastrophic happened, but it was sloppy. Instead of escalating it, I sent CW a private email. Just him. No boss, no CCs, no paper trail beyond a quiet heads up. I pointed out what he missed, why it mattered, and figured that would be the end of it. The very next night, he did the exact same thing again. I brought it up to him directly the next day. I wasn't aggressive, just firm. Hey, this happened again. You really need to follow the process because it's going to bite someone eventually. He nodded, acted appreciative, and thanked me for catching it. At that point, I still believed we were operating under the unspoken rule of not immediately running to the boss over fixable mistakes. Nobody wants to be that person. Fast forward to a Saturday morning not long after, I made the dumb but very human mistake of forgetting to charge my phone overnight. No alarm, no backup alarm. I woke up late, realized what happened, threw clothes on, and sprinted out the door. Thankfully, I live about a 5-minute walk from work, so I wasn't hours late, just embarrassingly so. I walked in about 50 minutes late, immediately apologized, and explained what happened. CW was there, and at first he seemed totally fine about it. No attitude, no comments, no passive-aggressive sighing. I figured that was the end of it. Annoying morning, lesson learned, move on. Then I found out what actually happened. Apparently, after only 25 minutes of me not showing up, CW called our boss, not texted, not waited, called at 7:10 in the morning on a Saturday, claimed he was concerned about my well-being. This is important context. In all my years working on this team, no one had ever done that, ever. If someone was late, we assumed traffic, a dead phone, oversleeping, normal human things. You waited it out unless something was seriously wrong. Even my boss, who's genuinely one of the most reasonable people I've ever worked for, told CW to relax and wait a bit because this stuff happens. When my boss told me about it later, he was visibly confused. He said it wasn't a big deal. I don't know why he called me. There was literally nothing I could do about it at that moment. Then he paused and asked me about a piece of equipment that had been left down for over 6 hours earlier in the week. That's when the tone shifted. I realized right there that by trying to be nice, I'd put myself in a stupid position. So I told him the truth. I explained that CW had missed the protocol, that I emailed him privately about it, and that it happened again the next night. I didn't sugarcoat it, but I didn't embellish either, just facts. My boss asked me to forward him the emails I'd sent to CW. I did. After reading them, my boss sighed and said something that stuck with me. He told me not to shield CW anymore. He explained that when issues like that get quietly handled peer-to-peer, it makes the whole team look bad when patterns emerge later. He needed to see it firsthand so he could address it properly. Then he added very clearly, if something like that happens again, I want to know about it. Message received. From that point on, I changed how I handled CW entirely. No more private heads up, no more quiet corrections. If I catch a mistake, especially one involving skipped protocols or equipment being left down, I document it and forward it directly to the boss. Clean, factual, unemotional. Date, time, what happened, that's it. What surprised me most was how often those emails started going out. That's the real lesson. It wasn't just one mistake he slipped on, it was a habit. And your private emails were letting the boss think it was a one-time thing, making the whole team's performance look worse than it actually was. You weren't just covering for him, you were hiding a problem from the person who could fix it. Once I stopped covering for him, a pattern became impossible to ignore. Missed steps, forgotten notifications, equipment not properly handed over. Things I'd previously brushed off as occasional slip-ups suddenly looked a lot more consistent when viewed together. My boss started addressing them directly with CW, and the difference in accountability was immediate. CW, on the other hand, barely speaks to me now. The casual chatter is gone, the fake friendliness evaporated overnight. I get curt responses, forced politeness, and a lot of avoiding eye contact. Funny how fast someone stops being friendly when they realize you're no longer absorbing their mistakes for them. Every so often I catch him watching me like he's trying to figure out whether I've noticed something else yet. I have. I just let management handle it now. The irony isn't lost on me. I tried to protect him from getting in trouble, and he repaid that by trying to escalate my minor lateness like it was a medical emergency. So now, instead of one email staying between coworkers, every mistake he makes lands squarely on the desk of the person who actually has authority over it. I haven't said a word to him about it. I don't need to. He made his position very clear that morning when he dialed the boss instead of waiting like everyone else. I just adjusted accordingly. I do wonder about his well-being sometimes, mostly because carrying that level of paranoia and pettiness around must be exhausting. But then I remember that all I did was stop doing him favors. And somehow that tells you everything you need to know. And our second story. I asked about my missing overtime, got a patronizing reply, and started a chain reaction that ended in massive fines. It was a well-known, long-established family-owned art supply store, the kind of place that had been around so long it felt permanent. Decades in the same location, a loyal customer base made up mostly of local artists who treated the place like a second home. The staff were knowledgeable, passionate, and genuinely helpful because many of them were artists themselves. We knew everyone. We knew what people liked, what brands they swore by, which canvas someone needed just by looking at their sketchbook. It was the kind of store that built its reputation on the people behind the counter. We were also chronically underpaid. Paychecks came every 2 weeks, and from the beginning, something about them felt off. The schedule worked in 2-week blocks, and occasionally during week 1, we'd be slammed. Holiday season, art fairs, school supply rushes. Suddenly, you're working 48 hours without blinking. Normally, that should mean overtime, except it never did. Instead, during week 2, management would quietly slash your hours. You'd be scheduled for under 32 hours. When payday came, they'd average the 2 weeks together and pay you as if you'd worked a perfectly neat 40 hours each week. No overtime, ever, not time and a half, not even a mention of it. What shocked me most wasn't just the math gymnastics, it was how normalized it was. No one talked about pay. We were explicitly told not to discuss wages with each other, framed as keeping things professional. Looking back, that rule was doing a lot of heavy lifting for them. As far as I could tell, no one had ever seriously challenged it. Eventually, after one particularly brutal 2-week stretch, I sat down and did the math myself. I was missing $192. Not life-changing money, but enough to matter when you're already barely scraping by. I went to the office manager and calmly asked her about it. She smiled at me the way adults smile at children who think they've discovered something clever. She pulled out a pen and a scrap of paper and explained very slowly how averages worked. "See," she said, "you worked more one week, less the next, so it evens out." Her tone was patient but condescending, like I should be grateful for the lesson. When I asked about overtime laws, she waved it off and said, "This is how payroll works here." I nodded, I smiled, I thanked her for taking the time to explain it to me. Then I went home and started making phone calls. That condescending smile was the point of no return. It told you everything. They weren't just stealing your money. They thought you were too naive or powerless to do anything about it. You thanking her for the explanation was the perfect quiet pivot before going to war. I anonymously contacted the U.S. Department of Labor and asked some very specific questions about overtime, pay periods, and averaging hours. I gave them the store's name. They didn't sound surprised. Around the same time, I happened to Google overtime laws, and stumbled across a law firm advertising services for employees cheated out of overtime pay. It felt like fate tapping me on the shoulder. I told one coworker I trusted, then another. We were careful, quiet, curious rather than angry at first. Between the two of us, we started reaching out to former employees, people who'd moved on, people who'd been there years before. Some were furious, some said they'd always suspected something but never had the energy to fight it. A few just shrugged, resigned to the idea that this was how things are. Meanwhile, we kept working like nothing was wrong, smiling at customers, recommending paints, cutting paper, running registers. Management had no idea anything was happening behind the scenes. Then one morning, a man from the government showed up. He wasn't loud, he wasn't dramatic, he just asked questions and requested records. He came back the next day. That's when the real owner showed up. The actual owner, the one who usually stayed far away from the day-to-day operations. Too polished and country club adjacent to bother with retail floors. He arrived all smiles and handshakes, trying to look unbothered. He didn't leave that way. By the time he walked out, his face was flushed, his smile gone, and his shirt visibly damp. A few days later, everyone was pulled into meetings. Then came the lawyer. The Department of Labor ruled exactly how you'd expect. The store was ordered to pay back every cent of accumulated unpaid overtime to every employee they'd ever done this to, with interest. They were fined heavily. They were also required to publish a notice in the local paper acknowledging the violation. For a family that cared deeply about appearances, that public humiliation hit hard. I didn't stick around to see everything play out. I left for graduate school not long after, but I heard updates. 2 longtime employees hired the same lawyer and filed civil suits, not just against the store, but against the owner and the office manager personally. Apparently, naming names felt appropriate after years of being treated like they didn't understand basic arithmetic. All of this, every audit, every fine, every settlement, could have been avoided if that office manager had said one simple word in that first conversation. Oops. If she just paid me my $192 instead of lecturing me like a child, the fallout wouldn't have ballooned into what I later heard was close to $50,000 in penalties, back pay, and legal fees. Instead, they doubled down on arrogance and got exactly what they earned. The store survived, technically. Its reputation didn't. Artists talk, employees talk. And once people realized a place built on creativity was quietly stealing from the very people who made it run, that trust doesn't come back easily. Cheaters always seem to think no one will notice, especially rich ones. They forget that eventually someone will do the math. And that's the final lesson they learned. Someone did the math, and then they did the reporting, and then they did the organizing. You didn't just notice, you acted. And you turned one person's $192 into justice for everyone they'd ever stolen from. That's how you turn a petty theft into a permanent stain. And our last story. My neighbor treated a disabled parking bay like her private spot after the disabled resident passed away. A few months ago, a small but incredibly irritating situation on my street finally boiled over, and watching it resolve itself was one of the most quietly satisfying things I've experienced in a long time. It wasn't dramatic in the explosive sense, but it was one of those slow-burn neighborhood entitlement stories that everyone who lives on a crowded street will immediately recognize. I live on a narrow street of terraced houses where parking's already a daily exercise in patience. Every house has at least one car, several have 2. One family down the road somehow owns 2 cars and 2 massive Mercedes Sprinter vans that they rotate like it's a logistical challenge designed by the council itself. On most nights, finding a spot anywhere near your own front door is a minor victory. Parking a street over or on the main road is more common than not. Everyone deals with it. Everyone grumbles. That's just how it is. A few doors down from me lives a neighbor who, until last year, legitimately had a disabled parking bay painted outside their house. Someone in the household was disabled, and the bay was approved, marked, and respected by the rest of the street. No one questioned it. No one complained. When parking's that tight, you learn very quickly which battles are worth fighting, and that one absolutely wasn't. Then the disabled resident passed away. It was sad, and the street was sympathetic. People gave space, offered condolences, and quietly moved on. What didn't move on, however, was the bright, very official-looking disabled bay still painted on the road directly outside their house. Weeks went by, then months. The markings stayed exactly where they were, as if nothing had changed. At first, most of us assumed it was just bureaucracy being slow. Councils aren't exactly known for lightning-fast response times, and repainting a road probably isn't high on the priority list, so people continued to avoid the space out of habit. Old routines die hard, especially when you're used to scanning the street and automatically skipping one spot. Then the notes started appearing. Someone parked there one evening, clearly fed up, clearly needing a space, and when they came back, there was a handwritten note tucked under their wiper. It wasn't polite, it wasn't informative, it was aggressive, written in thick pen telling them they were parked in a private disabled bay and that they were not allowed to park there. The note ended with a warning not to do it again. A few nights later, someone else parked there. This time, instead of a note, the neighbor knocked on their door. I didn't witness that exchange directly, but the story made its way down the street quickly. The neighbor apparently stood on the doorstep and said, "You need to move your car. That space is for us. We have disabled family." When the person asked who exactly she meant, since everyone knew the previous resident had passed, she got vague. "We have other disabled families," she said. "You're not allowed to use that space." Here's the thing. No one new had moved in. No one with mobility aids had been seen. No carers coming and going. No blue badge visible. Nothing had changed except the entitlement level. Over the next few weeks, this became a pattern. Anyone who parked there got a knock. Some people were told they were stealing a disabled space. Others were told they should be ashamed. One elderly man was told he should know better. It reached the point where people were actively warning visitors not to park there because they didn't want the hassle. Meanwhile, the neighbor used the space like it was her own private driveway. Her car sat there every day, perfectly centered in the bay, daring anyone to question it. Watching someone claim exclusive rights to a public road because the paint hadn't been removed yet was infuriating in the most low-level, slow-drip way. I finally had my breaking point one evening when I came home after a long day, circled the block twice, and ended up parking a full street away. As I walked back past the so-called disabled bay, I saw it sitting there empty, untouched, reserved, wasted. Meanwhile, the rest of us were playing musical chairs with our cars every night. That's when I decided I was done being polite. I didn't confront her, I didn't leave a note, I didn't get into a shouting match on the pavement. I just contacted the relevant authority. One email, calm, factual, and very boring. I explained that a disabled bay was still marked outside a property where the eligible resident had passed away over a year ago, and that it was now being treated as a private parking space. I asked if the bay was still valid or if it needed to be removed. That was it. No drama, no accusations, just facts. This is the perfect move. You went straight to the one audience that mattered, the people who decide what's painted on the road. You took it out of the personal and made it an administrative question. A week later, I came home from work and nearly laughed out loud. The disabled markings were gone. The bright paint had been scrubbed away and replaced with the same dull, unremarkable tarmac as the rest of the street. No sign, no symbol, no special treatment, just another normal parking space like everyone else had to deal with. The best part wasn't the fresh asphalt, though. It was the neighbor's face. She stood outside her house staring at the road like someone had stolen something from her in broad daylight. She walked up and down the length of the space, looking at it from different angles as if expecting the markings to magically reappear. She even stood there with her phone out, presumably taking photos or calling someone to complain. That evening, for the first time in over a year, someone else parked there. She didn't knock, she didn't leave a note, she didn't say a word. Since then, the space has been used like every other space on the street, first come, first served. No special claims, no fake justifications, no guilt trips. Parking's still a nightmare, but at least it's an honest one now. The neighbor still parks there sometimes when she gets lucky. So does everyone else. And every time I walk past and see a different car sitting in that spot, I feel a small, petty sense of peace. It turns out the space was never private. It just took a repaint to remind her of that. All three stories are about correcting an imbalance of power and restoring fairness, but they do it in very different arenas. Story 2 wins for me, while stories 1 and 3 are brilliant examples of correcting individual, localized entitlement. Story 2's impact was monumental. It wasn't just about getting one person's $192 back, it was about systemic justice. The narrator organized, reported, and triggered a government audit that returned stolen wages to everyone and publicly humiliated the thieves. It turned personal frustration into collective vindication and changed the culture of an entire workplace. That's a victory on a whole other scale. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.